Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. And my guest today is Jesse Bassett of Good Grief in Princeton. Welcome, Jesse.
Thank you.
So, Good Grief is kind of an interesting title. Tell us what Good Grief is.
Yeah, Good Grief is a nonprofit organization that provides free and unlimited support to grieving children, teens, young adults, and their families after the death of a mother, father, brother, or sister. And we do that through peer support programs, education, and advocacy work.
You know, that's so interesting because mostly we don't talk about grief. It's kind of out there. And I know I've actually had people say to me, I'm still grieving, and people tell me I should be over it. And I find that shocking because when do you get over it? Is there a timetable? So for me, it sounds like you're providing a space where people can actually let their grief unfold, perhaps?
Certainly. A big part of the work that we do is to provide grieving children and teens and young adults and their families with the space to be able to have a supportive and a caring community, and so that their process of grieving can happen in the way that they want to. One of the things we talk about at Good Grief is that everyone's grief is unique. And so we often have these expectations that there should be this timeline, or that maybe there are these particular stages that we should go through of anger, denial, acceptance.
So then you're not doing it right if you're not doing
Kubler-Ross's stages, yeah. And so we don't like to talk about it that way because we see everyone's experience as being unique. And therefore, like, everyone's experience with death and grief is going to be a unique one as well and play out differently. And so we want to provide participants in our program with the space to be able to think and to feel in the way that they need to.
Yeah. And it's interesting, because I suspect that for children, it's children sometimes get lost in the shuffle. And I know I did an interview of people who had lost their siblings. And what happened was they got lost in the shuffle. Everybody paid attention to the parents and then said, take care of your parents. And suddenly not only have they lost a sibling, but they've lost their parents. So I think with children, it's really so important.
Yes, children are often called the forgotten mourners because for whatever reason, we have a really hard time supporting kids when they're grieving. And some of it has to do with some of our cultural stigmas around death and grief. And we often make these assumptions that, kids don't really understand, especially younger kids. We assume that they don't really understand what's going on. Or maybe we're afraid that by talking to them about death and grief, we might open up a possibly traumatizing experience for them.
Right.
Or what more than often probably is we just don't know what to do, and so we just avoid the situation entirely. And so unfortunately, kids usually are the forgotten mourners.
Yeah. And I shared with you before a story that when I was 11 or 12 years old, my best friend's father died. And nobody said anything to us. The teacher didn't say anything to us. She disappeared for a while, then she reappeared. And I remember even as a 10, 11-year-old, I felt so inadequate. I didn't know how to talk to her. To me, she was like another person, almost like an alien, we're not the same people we were. And so we kind of just didn't talk to each other. And I know I always felt the loss. So it's so important to educate the adults about the children as well.
Yeah, certainly. And that's a huge part of the work that we're doing is educating people in schools and churches, faith organizations, individuals in all different areas within our communities here in New Jersey about how do we support grieving kids? How do we have conversations around death and grief? How do we have more cultural awareness about where we are historically to better understand why we make some of the assumptions that we do, why we have some of the stigmas that we have? For us, it's really about increasing emotional intelligence for people. And so we're really about the work, not only about supporting kids and teenagers and their families as they are going through this incredibly challenging time, but it's also about educating the community about how can you provide a loving and caring and supportive environment for them.
Yeah. And you had sent me some notes, and I want to refer to some of the topics, but it's so you've got so they can keep coming back as long as they want.
As long as they want to come.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's free.
It is.
Yeah. And one of the questions I think that comes up is, I know in talking to other people who have had loss, they almost feel like they're betraying their loved one by actually being engaged in life. Do children feel that?
There can be this sense that maybe a fear of going on.
Yes.
We call it going on living and loving after loss. And, you know, again, going back to the question you had before, I think, you know, part of the process of grieving is integrating this loss into your life. So it's not about moving on, it's not about a timeline, but it's about integration. And so how can we think about death and grief differently, where death is a normal part of life?
Right.
We're all going to die. And
no.
yeah, and that can be a really scary thing for a lot of people, and that's okay. I think that's a good first step to admit that. And at some point we will all probably grieve the loss of somebody that we love. And so how do we continue to go on after that person has died and integrate that experience into our life in a meaningful way? We were talking earlier about meaning making and identity formation.
Let's talk about that, yes.
So that's an important part of the work that we do with our kids is how do we develop in them a sense of hopefulness for the future? And for us, kind of the secret ingredients in that are how do we forge meaning out of these experiences that we didn't have a choice. These kids didn't have a choice that this person died. It just happened to them. And so there can, as a result of that experience, be all of these kind of bigger existential, difficult questions about the meaning of life and purpose and existence. And these are big and scary and hard questions for anybody.
And as children, you could look at it as some sort of punishment.
Definitely.
The meaning you can forge as I must have done something wrong, I didn't love them enough.
And unfortunately, there are even, you know, people who might even say things like that in our culture to try to make sense of it, because they don't know how to make sense of it either. And so we try to provide a space for not only support, but also for these kids to be able to process this experience, this life event, to integrate it into their life, to begin the work of forging meaning and then building their identity with this experience as a part of that identity moving forward.
Right. So it's not everybody forging the same meaning.
No, it's different for everyone because, again, everyone's experience with death and loss and their grief experience is a unique experience.
Yeah.
And that experience is, affected by lots of different things. The nature of the death. So someone experiencing terminal illness versus maybe homicide or suicide or any of these kinds of death would have very different lenses to interpret this death through. Neither of them better or worse. You know, we like to place value judgments on things, and we try not to do that at Good Grief. We try to just say, you know, all of these different factors are going to play into a child's interpretation of this experience in their life. Socioeconomics, religious heritage, cultural heritage, lots of different things play into a child's, that lens that they're looking through as they're trying to interpret this experience and how it, changes the rest of their life.
And it's interesting that you mentioned, like, if their parent was murdered. I mean, there's a lot of meaning that can get added to that. Like, the world will never be a safe place. I can never protect myself. I can never protect my family.
Or unfortunately, a lot of stigma around it too, and a lot of cultural assumptions that happen, especially for kids. So they're going to go back to school, and all their friends are going to make assumptions about this person, and it's only a particular kind of person that would be murdered, isn't it? And so what kind of things were they involved in? And unfortunately, lots of times that's not true. It's just not. And so things happen in life that you can't fit into these neat little tidy packages that we often want to put everything into to try to explain the world around us. But there's a lot of gray area actually in how we live and the events that take place in our lives. And so we're inviting these kids into that gray area and sitting with them in it and saying, we're going to be with you through this and help you to make sense of this and process it together.
And I suspect that whatever coping skills and the skill of forging meaning and identity will serve them everywhere in their lives.
Certainly. And that's something we like to talk about, is that not only, again, are we teaching kids and talking to them about death and grief and building those coping skills, talking to them about things like resiliency, but yeah, we're building emotional intelligence. And so it goes beyond death and grief.
Yes.
Death and grief are a part of human existence and a part of, understanding us as human persons in the world and how we make sense of the world. And that has so much carryover into the rest of our lives and relationships and future jobs and whatever it might be.
Yeah. Do you go into schools and talk to other children?
We don't go into schools to talk to kids. We go into schools to talk to guidance counselors, teachers, administrators. We offer workshops, professional development days, things like that.
Because even looking at my own example, I was thinking it would have been so great if, the teacher had come in and talked, she had been trained enough, or somebody who was trained had come in and said, gosh, her father died, and, to be able to talk about it and create some understanding, or maybe not really, but maybe demystify it a little.
Yeah And again, I think this goes back to the whole, we often are kind of have some fear around the topic and don't know what to say, and so we just avoid it. And this happens in schools all the time. And so the really unfortunate knee-jerk reaction that often happens, not always, but many times in schools, is when a child who has experienced loss might be feeling particularly emotional or whatever it might be, and then the teacher doesn't know how to react to that. And so the first response is, you should go see the guidance counselor.
Right, like something is wrong.
That's communicating something to that child that this is not the space where it's okay to do that.
Right.
You need to go do that somewhere else. And I think that's a microcosm of what we do culturally as well.
Yes.
We expect people, you should not do that in public.
Right.
Clean yourself up, get yourself together, go see,
man up,
whoever you need to see to take care of what's going on. And then you can come back to us when you feel better, and when you have everything fixed. We've got yourself put back together. Yeah.
So I think it's a very significant thing that you're doing. And one of the things that made sense when I looked at the website is there's peer. It's not like they're thrown. The young ones are necessarily together with the teenagers all the time. That they're in with peer groups as well.
Correct. So at the beginning of the night, we run our peer support groups on a weeknight, either a Tuesday or Wednesday here in Princeton. And so they've got school and all this stuff going on, extracurricular activities. They come in around 6:30, and we actually serve everybody pizza. So they get a free pizza dinner to start the night.
Right.
And so they do get to spend some time interacting with everybody that's assigned to the same night as them. And then we start the evening with an opening ritual, which is always the same. All of the kids and their families get into a huge circle in a room. We call it our opening circle room. And we pass around a talking stick, and every kid gets to share their name and then the name of the person who died. And then they just keep passing it around the room and talk about an experience, especially for a new family that comes into Good Grief for the first time, that immediately reduces that sense of isolation that is really common after loss.
Yes,
where they're in this room with maybe 30 other people who have had a similar experience as them, and they're sharing their name, and they're sharing, this is the person in my life that died. So there is that shared experience with kids. The younger kids is starting as young as 3 years old with the older teenagers, young adults, and then we split them off into age-appropriate groups.
And we're going to be showing a video clip later that kind of actually shows what goes on. But one of the things that really made so much sense to me, sometimes they just play. It's not about just talking about grief.
That's
it's
right.
about being the wholeness of who you are. You're going to cry, you're going to laugh, you're going to play, you're going
That's
to
right.
do all the things, yes.
Yeah, we expect kids often to act like adults.
Right.
And we want to give permission for kids at Good Grief to continue to be kids and to communicate as kids. And to play. And we talk about play as being the work of children. And play is the way that kids communicate. And so we want to provide them with a wonderful space where they feel at home, they feel comfortable. They can, with kids who are their age, play in lots of different spaces with different modalities where they can express themselves in lots of different ways. So arts and crafts. We've got this room called the Volcano Room where they can do physical play. It's a fully padded room where they can just kind of let it all out.
Oh, that's
but we're
so
also
great.
providing them with a space where we are educating them about safe play. And so we don't talk about good and bad decisions at Good Grief. We talk about healthy versus unhealthy. And so kids need to let things out physically. And so we'll talk about different emotions, whether it's anger or frustration, and they might feel it in their fists, and they'll draw it with like a red pen and it's red hot. And I feel it in my fists or in my head, and I just need to let it out. Well, you have a choice to make. You could either take that anger and that frustration and hit your sibling, or you could maybe punch a pillow or go run around outside or whatever it might be. Now, which one of those is a healthy decision versus unhealthy? Which one comes with consequences, and which one accomplishes what you're trying to do, which is actually let that emotion or feeling out.
And I think that adults need that too. And it's funny, because as a coach, I've sometimes said to my clients, they're in such frustrating situations. I said, go buy a plastic baseball bat and smack the stuffing out of a pillow and howl and scream and whatever. You're not hurting anyone, but you're releasing something. Otherwise, you start to implode.
Yeah.
So I love that the kids get to do that.
Yeah, so physical play is a really important thing for children. I mentioned arts and crafts.
Right.
Kids express themselves in lots of different ways. Music, we've got some different musical instruments. We do wonderful activities with the kids that are planned every night by the Good Grief staff that provide them with different outlets to express themselves and have various conversations around death and grief and different topics that we kind of deem as important in their process.
And you train volunteers,
We
right?
do. And volunteers are really what make it possible. I talked about the program being free and unlimited for families. We crunched some numbers this last year. We have over 150 volunteer facilitators, and those are the folks that are actually in the room with the children facilitating peer support groups that are overseen by staff.
Is
like
it usually
myself.
one facilitator per group?
It's usually at least 2 per group. With the younger groups, it's 3 to 4, depending on the size of the group.
That's great.
So that there's plenty of interaction and sharing that takes place. And after we crunched the numbers, over 200 volunteers monthly at Good Grief this last year, it was $1.9 million in in-kind services that it would cost Good Grief to run our programs. So we're serving more than 750 participants at Good Grief. So these are the families of grieving kids and parents at Good Grief on a monthly basis. And it would not be possible for us to do that without our volunteer base, without these folks who are just giving their time and energy and are committed to this organization.
And I read some statistic where 1 in 7 children or people in New Jersey will experience the death of someone significant. So you consider that it's not only them who are grieving and it's impacting them, but it's impacting everyone else in their environment.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that 1 in 7 number is a really important one for us and helps us to communicate how many grieving kids there are out in the communities around us that we may not even know about. And we estimate that there are this year around 280,000 grieving kids in the state of New Jersey alone. Wow. And so we have only touched the tip of the iceberg. And we've been fairly conservative in our approach because we know that there are so many grieving kids out there. And but it's important that we create a culture and communities in which we can provide these kids with support, and that we can help them to process this really significant life event that they're going through.
And we're going to be going to the video in just a moment, but one of the things I read is that closure is the goal. So it's really, as you talk about it, it really is process, and everybody's process is different.
Yes.
And they can come and go as long as they want.
Yes.
So everybody's closure, so to speak, is different also.
Yeah, and actually that's kind of one of the paradigm shifts that we talk about, is that oftentimes we want closure to be kind of the goal, that we expect there to be this timeline of grief where
Right.
there's a beginning and an end.
Right, and then we close the...
And we have all these theories about what happens in the middle.
Right.
And then, we kind of close it and it's done. And we don't think about it that way. You know, that loss, the death of that person that you love will be with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And for kids, they will experience it differently through all their different developmental stages as they grow up and they become different persons and they process things differently.
Yeah.
Imagine a 3-year-old kid who lost a parent, then becomes a middle schooler who all of a sudden is much more self-aware, has all of these changes going on. Well, they're gonna all of a sudden need to process that loss in a
Yes.
very different way.
Yes.
And this will continue through our whole lives as we change as persons. And so we don't talk about closure, we talk about, again, integration.
Right. I love that. I love that. Because who you are at the end of it is going to be a different person. When
Yes.
somebody dies, you are a different person.
Yes.
So it's not something that you can, okay, let me sift through this and get it done, get her done.
Yeah.
and then, okay, we move on. You have been forever impacted, not only yourself, but your children will be impacted. So however you process that, the person you become is someone who has either integrated it well or still hasn't integrated, and then you're parenting based on that.
Certainly. It can affect those relationships, friendships, spouse relationships, whatever it might be.
Absolutely. I'm going to stop you right now because I want to share the video because it
definitely.
really gives people the experience of what happens there. So we're going to pause. Okay. Thanks.
Coming to Good Grief has definitely helped me heal. I remember some days coming here feeling sad and then coming out feeling like, wow, that was amazing. I feel so much better now.
I can just tell everybody here and they'll understand how I feel. Like some people at school, when I tell them, they don't really get anything about it.
My husband John died of pulmonary embolism, so it was very sudden. The worst thing ever, having to tell your kids that their father has passed away.
I like coming to Good Grief because there are other kids there that I can talk to without them acting weird around me, and that makes me feel a lot better.
I lost my wife, his mom, Trisha, to breast cancer. You know, there's a phrase that people say, I'm sorry for your loss. And for me, it really felt more like, one should say, I'm sorry for you are lost, because that's really how I felt.
Good Grief is a place in Morristown and Princeton, New Jersey, where children can come and get the support they need after experiencing the death of a parent or sibling. Statistically, it's 1 out of 7 children will experience the death of a parent before the age of 20, and without Good Grief, children throughout New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania would not have a place to go to get support to begin their healing, their lifelong grief journey. So Good Grief is working hard to ensure that no child ever has to grieve alone and has access to support. All of the Good Grief programs are free to our families, and they attend the program every 2 weeks. Families can stay enrolled for as long as they feel they need the program. On a night of support, our families, they come into our opening circle room, and we pass around a talking stick.
I'm Haley, I lost my dad.
I'm Heather, I lost my husband.
I'm PJ, I lost my wife.
And through that experience, they're able to name it out loud and see all the other people in the room who are going through the same thing that they are. So they feel in really magnitude that they are not alone. It's essential for grieving kids to meet other grieving kids because in our society, we really struggle with talking openly about death. It makes us uncomfortable. And so grief can be a naturally isolating experience. And when a child comes to Good Grief and meets other kids, instantly it breaks down barriers. They know they're not alone. There are other people going through it.
Everybody goes into a room and they've got their little bag of problems and each helps each other. It's like a boat and all the oars come out and they help each other. And it's so inspirational. By the end of the night, you can just see everybody's taken another little step.
And a lot of it comes back to, you see kids playing here and having fun. That's part of what's creating the safe, comfortable environment that is there for them to allow for the expression of grief or some emotion or some feeling. If it was some rigid, come here and talk about serious stuff all the time, it wouldn't be comfortable, it wouldn't want to come back.
I remember at the first night, he came out with a smile on his face, for kind of the first time in quite some time. This is some place that he can at least recharge.
Many of us talk about wanting to not cry in front of our children, but then eventually we realize that if they don't see us cry, maybe they don't think it's okay for them to cry. And talking with people at Good Grief who feel the same way I do, we just talk about those sort of coping mechanisms and, share with each other what works for us.
Every time I come, I enjoy it, and it's really helped me cope with my feelings as well as keep on with my life and keep on living.
1, 2, 3. Orange, yes! Woo!
Good Grief is a happy place. Sometimes people get the impression that it's very sad, very morose, a lot of tears. It's a very upbeat place where you walk in the door and you feel the kindness and the love and the compassion.
A lot of the kids are just here having fun. They're letting loose, they're being kids. They're being normal kids, and there's nothing wrong with that. One of the things that always troubled me as a kid with a loss is that notion of, well, now you're the man of the house. No, I'm 8 years old, I should still be a kid.
Not having Good Grief in my life would definitely be very difficult, because I do feel like it's a place to sort of come and vent to people who get it.
If Good Grief weren't here, it would be a major loss because it has become like part of my family. I really could not imagine not having these people in my life, on a regular basis.
And it's just become a big part of our lives and a big part of helping us through our grief process. Right, pal?
And whoever dies still is in your heart.
That's right.
All right, so, I'm so happy you were here. It puts a face on it. It's not just talking about something. You actually tell us what's going on, and you've educated us and hopefully opened some doors. And I invite people to check you out, talk about you, come. There are tours of the facility.
Yeah.
And to volunteer even.
Yes, we're always, looking for more folks to get involved. The volunteer experience there is a really wonderful one. We really invest in our volunteers, and again, like I said, they are the reason that this can, be possible.
So it makes a difference for them and for you.
It makes a huge difference for them and for us.
So we're out of time. Jesse, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And please keep us posted and keep in touch with us, and we can maybe do another show later on down the road.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us.